industry-wide, what have leaders drawn from experiences like yours? And what other initiatives do you think there's potential for and is starting to grow now?
First is that we really need to kind of reimagine how we engage with patients. And it needs to be radical, the way that we work towards including them. And this means moving beyond tokenism and, including them as a kind of a tick box exercise, and really moving towards more systemic and kind of structural involvement and inclusion, being patient-centric, because innovation moves only as fast as its speed of adoption. And that readiness of clinicians and healthcare systems to embrace new innovation is really the bridge to delivering patient outcomes.
If we flip the coin and we see the patient on the other side, they're obviously doing a lot of work. But what happens when the patient actually goes online to ChatGPT?
One of the key concerns and questions that the global patient community had, which was how AI is going to change the way that they communicate with their clinical teams. And we conducted a very extensive piece of qualitative research and interviews with patients, with clinicians, with AI experts. And we published a white paper that's primarily aimed at healthcare professionals and patients, but essentially provides an overview of the challenges and the opportunities of using AI for what we would call joint participatory decision making. And I think it's clear that even though AI is very much in its nascence in this space, it does have huge potential to fundamentally change the way patients and clinicians communicate. For patients, it can help them compare therapy options. It can help them prepare for their appointments. And it can also help them find clinical studies to participate in.
Welcome to Pharmatica, the podcast that explores the pharmaceutical life cycle through real-world insights and practical strategies. I'm your host, Shubhangi Dua, podcast producer and a B2B journalist. Joining us today is Kate O'Reilly, a pharmacist and healthcare transformation partner at Roche. Kate has spent her career exploring how pharma connects with patients using digital tools, AI, and real-world insights to reshape the way medicines are developed and delivered. She's now also the president of the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association, Dublin chapter. Today, we will be talking about innovations, challenges, and strategies that are driving the future of pharma, such as AI, of course, and digitally centered systems, and what every pharma leader can learn from them. So welcome, Kate. It's so great to have you on.
Hi, Shubu. Thank you so much for having me today.
So just before we dive into the key questions, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you started in this field.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm a pharmacist by background, and I have been really fortunate in that I've gotten to experience many facets of that bench to bedside process that we always talk about in life sciences. So after my pharmacy degree, I went on and did a PhD in neuroscience because I was fascinated by how medicines worked on the brain, the molecular targets and associated human behaviors. So I spent some time in early lab-based research. And in parallel, I was also really fascinated by not just how medicines get to market, but how they're appraised from a quality, safety, and efficacy perspective. So I also spent a bit of time in regulation. But it was that early kind of patient-facing experience by virtue of working as a pharmacist across various clinical settings, across the community, across hospital, mental health and addiction services, that was really formative, I think, for me, and something I really valued. And in those patient-facing roles, it was really clear to me and became really clear that medicine is just one part of the picture. So over the last number of years, I've spent my time exploring the other elements of that picture and really understanding and delving into that beyond the pill, holistic patient experience through various roles in access and policy and in digital health. And that's very much what I'm focusing in on at the moment in my current role. So I work as healthcare transformation partner at Roche in the Irish affiliate, and I sit on the healthcare innovation team. And I'm responsible really for three kind of main areas. The first is patient partnerships. So working with patient communities to understand patients' values, their preferences, their needs and insights. And when I say patient communities, what I'm referring to is all those people and organizations that are integral to the patient. So the patient, the individual themselves, their families, their caregivers, the organizations advocating on their behalf, and the organizations delivering their care. I also work in system shaping initiatives to work with healthcare system stakeholders and really bring those patient preferences to life and ensure that the supporting infrastructure and enablers are in place. And then I also work in digital innovation to really address any supplementary gaps or outstanding gaps in the patient journey using digital solutions.
So how do you tie it together on a day-to-day basis? And tell me a little bit more about what does healthcare transformation really mean?
Yeah, absolutely, Shubu. So essentially, it's about driving meaningful change. And that doesn't come overnight. It's intentional, it's deliberate, and it's incremental. So it really has to start from a needs led place, understanding the problem. And it may sound cliche, but for falling in love with the problem, I think we can get distracted a lot with shiny new technology. So we have to be really careful not to retrofit them into perceived gaps. Otherwise, we really risk developing some incredible, brilliant solutions for problems that actually may not be there. So it's that overarching change that we want to see, that patients want to see, and that clinicians want to see, and driving it at a system-wide level, ensuring that the leadership is in place, governance structures are in place, and that everyone is aligned on the outcomes.
It's a very sensitive area to be working in, and you've had such a unique journey from pharmacy to healthcare transformation now at Roche, which is amazing. Patient engagement is a term we hear a lot, but it can mean many things. So tell me a little bit about what it means from your perspective and why is it so important today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, it's really about ensuring that the healthcare experience actually works for those that it's meant to serve. Innovation is advancing at such a pace. It's rapidly evolving and it has huge and enormous potential to change the way that we deliver healthcare for the better. But the gap often between the clinical promise and the real world reality can often be quite substantial. And I think closing the gap really requires that we understand the nuanced and the real world context in which innovation is used. And patients hold the key to a lot of that information. By virtue of living with their conditions, they are experts in their own care. And when we think about it, they're the only individual that's involved in decision making across every aspect of the patient journey from end to end. And that arms them with really critical insights about their care needs, and not just from a clinical perspective, but also from social, from psychological perspective as well. So I think that's really the essence of it. And how it's operationalized is really by integrating that human-centric perspective that we can gather from patients and understanding the multidimensionality of their experience. And this is often referred to as the missing data because it's often invisible to clinicians and to policymakers and people leading transformation initiatives. You know, patients can tell us so much about their care that we may not otherwise pick up, things about their lived experience and the true impact of the disease or treatment on their day-to-day life. Things like how long it takes to travel to an appointment, you know, the amount of time a person may need to take off work, for example. They also can tell us a lot about their additional gaps in care, things like symptom relief that may not otherwise be captured as traditional endpoints, and more holistic evidence about what really matters to them and the outcomes that matter to them. I think historically, we relied a lot on healthcare professionals as conduits for capturing patient insights. And this paradigm has very much shifted in the last few years. That's underpinned by a few key themes and trends that, firstly, patients' expectations are evolving. They are becoming more actively involved in the decision making. They're expecting to be more involved in aspects of their care and want to be empowered to take a more active role and proactive role in their healthcare related decision making. Stakeholders as well and regulators, for example, are also placing more value on understanding the patient experience and on patient engagement methodologies.
Before we go to the stakeholder experience, though, I would like to ask you, if we flip the coin and we see the patient on the other side, they're obviously doing a lot of work. I mean, I wouldn't say equal to the healthcare provider, but almost as much work by providing their symptoms, by detailing out what's really happening. But what happens when the patient actually goes online to ChatGPT or even any sort of like LLM today that's publicly available to use, and they start going through their symptoms? Then what happens? From that perspective, what do healthcare providers do about it? How do they stop them from, unraveling?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And I think, the way that patients and healthcare professionals communicate has evolved so much in the last number of years. Googling was very much yesterday and AI is today. And I think even with the introduction of Google, it was a bit of an adjustment where patients started to come to appointments with isolated facts. Whereas now with AI, they're actually coming with tailored recommendations and insights. So that requires a real adjustment. But there's also an opportunity there. And I think, particularly from the way that clinicians or healthcare professionals and patients communicate. And we've done a lot of work at Roche around shared decision making. And so last year we published a white paper around the role of AI in shared decision making. And I think this is one of the areas where there is greatest potential for AI when it comes to patient education and how they are empowered to engage with their healthcare professionals and their clinical teams. So shared decision making, essentially, it's a form of patient-centered communication that involves making decisions based on both the clinical facts, but also personal preferences. In our white paper last year, which was published last year, we addressed one of the key concerns and questions that the global patient community had, which was how AI is going to change the way that they communicate with their clinical teams. And we conducted a very extensive piece of qualitative research and interviews with patients, with clinicians, with AI experts. And we published a white paper that's primarily aimed at healthcare professionals and patients, but essentially provides an overview of the challenges and the opportunities of using AI for what we would call joint participatory decision making. And I think it's clear that even though AI is very much in its nascence in this space, it does have huge potential to fundamentally change the way patients and clinicians communicate. For patients, it can help them compare therapy options. It can help them prepare for their appointments. And it can also help them find clinical studies to participate in. On the other hand, for clinicians, it can help them prepare information and complex information in particular in a more digestible format. But like anything with AI, there are legal and ethical considerations. So I think in essence, what the top lines kind of take away is that while it's in its nascence, it has huge potential to change the way patients and clinicians communicate, but it's not a substitute for medical expertise. And it is a supportive tool to really enhance the way patients and clinicians communicate and support and enable more patient-centered decision-making.
So when we look at operationalizing patient engagement, you gave us some really good points that have come out from the white paper that you just talked about. So how effective has it been, would you say? What's the recent update?
Look, absolutely. It's a space that's very much evolving. And I think that's very much down to the fact that there is a really strong growing awareness of the cost of exclusion, a failure to include patients, because there is increasing evidence to show that when patients are not involved, this can often lead to brilliant innovation, but that may not be fit for real world use or may not fit real world needs. And that can also lead to wasted resources and reduced trust, for example. So it really has become a pillar of a successful innovation, because when we think about it, it really is only through the lens of patients, of clinicians, of those who are going to be the end users of innovation. It's really only through their lens that we can actually understand the full value of innovation, how it's used in the real world setting. And it's ultimately the only way we can really drive outcomes that are both clinically impactful, but also really holistically meaningful to those who are going to be using them.
We've talked a lot about AI. So if I had to ask you another question, because AI and digital health are changing the pharmaceutical life cycle space right now. So in your opinion, if we have to look past the hype of it, where do you see AI having the most profound human impact on the patient and their journey?
Everything that we do at Roche is very much guided by the patient voice. And as a patient-inclusive company, our philosophy is very much that everything we do for patients, we do with patients as partners every step of the way. So this is the cornerstone of how we approach innovation. And it's very much from a needs-led perspective. So what we're hearing from patients and patient communities in terms of what they need. And this obviously changes, depending on the disease area. But by and large, what patients are saying and what patients want is they want more access to information. They want to have more informed conversations with their healthcare providers. And they also want to be treated at more convenient locations, for example, at home or in the community setting. So a lot of the innovation and the digital initiatives that we've been working on are centered around those needs. So there's a few kind of key examples that come to mind. So in the MS or the multiple sclerosis space, we partnered with an AI company called Pharmatica to develop Breeza, which is an AI-enabled companion app for people with MS or multiple sclerosis. The impetus for developing this really stemmed from insights from the MS patient community, who I suppose fed back that they wanted to have more informed conversations with their healthcare professionals. So we worked with the patient community, representatives from the patient community, and with Pharmatica to develop this AI-enabled app called Breeza. And essentially it provides educational materials in a digestible format for patients. And patients and the patient community more broadly were involved in testing the user-friendliness of this, and it was essentially a co-creation initiative. But it has a number of key functions. So it helps users track their MS and symptoms and also their daily activities, so diet and lifestyle. It feeds the data back continuously to their care teams, and it also then provides tailored recommendations on how to better manage their condition. So it essentially empowers patients to self-manage and to also be proactive in communicating with their care teams.
It sounds like it's kind of like the Aura Ring evolution that's come in, but Aura Ring was in the fitness space and now this is in the pharmaceutical space, which is really great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what's really relevant here is, and particularly when we think of, say, a disease like MS, is that continuous, I suppose, data collection element. So for people living with MS, they experience fluctuations in their physical and their mental health status that it may not be captured during a single snapshot, I suppose, moment in time when they might meet their clinician or healthcare professional, which is maybe several times a year. But by virtue of engaging in an app like this, data can be collected constantly throughout, and it gives a more accurate representation of an individual's health status overall.
I look forward to the expansion of Breeza, to be honest with you. It sounds quite exciting. And you did mention about healthcare system stakeholders earlier and how patients are collaborating with them. Is Breeza part of that initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially it's about ensuring that the clinicians and the healthcare systems are also taking on that journey. And I think a big part of that is, building what we call efficient data ecosystems and actually making the most of the use of the expert use of data, which is really foundational to realizing the full benefit and potential of innovation. And we've done obviously a lot of work in the MS space, but also in the oncology space. And actually quite close to home. So we've a few partnerships with the NHS, for example. One example actually comes to mind in the breast cancer space. Okay. And this really stemmed from the challenge around COVID, diagnostic delays, and also the fact that patients were struggling to access information because of the fact that the screening program was suspended and it was difficult to meet with their clinicians. So we partnered with a university teaching hospital to essentially streamline the breast cancer pathway and empower access to information through the use of educational avatars. So we worked with the patients and the university teaching hospital to co-build avatars, and they were appraised by the patient community. We also worked with the hospital who provided kind of the clinical leadership and insights on the content creation and the IT resources to ensure that they were seamlessly integrated into the breast cancer pathway.
In the pharmaceutical industry, industry-wide, what have leaders drawn from experiences like yours? And what other initiatives do you think there's potential for and is starting to grow now?
Working with the healthcare system is really, really important. And, as important as it is to engage patients and to understand their needs and to drive innovation with that bottom-up approach, it's equally as important to bring clinicians on that journey and work with stakeholders in that kind of co-creative, kind of meaningful way. So first is that we really need to kind of reimagine how we engage with patients, and it needs to be radical the way that we work towards including them. And this means moving beyond tokenism and, including them as a kind of a tick box exercise and really moving towards more systemic and kind of structural involvement and inclusion. And by this, I mean that patients really need to have a permanent seat at the table so that all the strategic decision makings are very much anchored in the lives that we are aiming to transform. But also, we really need to be mindful of the clinicians and healthcare stakeholders more broadly. And it's important that we give equal weight to their insights as well as patients, and that we don't overlook them or they don't come as an afterthought when we're focused on being patient-centric, because innovation moves only as fast as its speed of adoption. And that readiness of clinicians and healthcare systems to embrace new innovation is really the bridge to delivering patient outcomes.
Right. And if you had to look at it in the future, for instance, 5 to 10 years from now, how do you see pharma companies practically interacting with patients, and how should they integrate real world, like how are they integrating real world insights into decision making 5 to 10 years from now?
I think we've come a long way in terms of where we are right now, but there is still a lot of work to do. And I think we're definitely moving in the right direction at Roche in terms of the way we are systematic in the way that we engage with patients and patient communities. So we drive what we call purposeful partnerships. And I think this is the cornerstone of a lot of the work we do with patient communities. And this is all driven by what we call patient-driven science. So it's about really looking beyond what's clinically meaningful, but also developing innovation in a way that's meaningful in that it reflects what also truly matters to patients. So it means balancing our understanding of what's scientifically important with what's meaningful and holistically important for patients, so that we can really get that robust, kind of rigorous and comprehensive understanding of how innovation works in the real world setting and the value it brings in the real world context. So systematic and early engagement with patient communities, with clinicians and healthcare stakeholders is really, really essential in that respect. But the premise upon which we operate is that it's about early and systematic engagement with patient communities. It's about building trusted relationships and also co-creating solutions that bring mutual value to patients, to healthcare systems, and also to society. And this means moving beyond just understanding how patients are diagnosed, how they're treated, but getting a really nuanced understanding of their broader holistic experience so we can make really meaningful changes to the patient journey. And this means involving them in the dialogue as well and the decision making along the way. And it means integrating their diverse and their representative perspectives across the life cycle of our medicines. And I think one key example, or one place where we've done this really successfully is in the design of our clinical studies and integration of what we call patient relevant endpoints.
We're nearly at the end of the conversation. So just before you go, one final question for you. In 60 seconds, if there are any key takeaways you would like to share from your experience in pharma tech for pharma leaders, what would it be and why?
There's 3 kind of key things that come to mind. And first is that radical shift that we really want to see towards patient inclusion. And that means really moving beyond tokenism to designing innovation, not for them, but with them as partners along the way, and to move towards an approach that's based around more structural inclusion. And that means ensuring that they are have a permanent seat at the decision-making table so that all our strategic pivots and decisions are ultimately grounded and anchored in the very lives that we want to transform. And I think, second of all, we really need to be mindful that we're also bringing clinicians on that journey and engaging with them early, because ultimately the clinician user experience and the readiness by which clinicians want to embrace innovation will dictate the speed at which patients are impacted. And ultimately, I suppose we want to ensure that by engaging with them, healthcare transformation isn't just sustainable, it's also frictionless and seamless when it's introduced. And I think finally, it's about really being disciplined when it comes to needs-led, approaches to innovation. It's about being really disciplined, I think, when it comes to applying a needs-led approach. When we think about healthcare transformation, those that have been really successful are characterized by being intentional and deliberate and incremental. Like they don't happen overnight. So we need to take the time and fall back in love with the problem and really resist the urge to be distracted by shiny new tools and technologies, and essentially trying to retrofit them into perceived gaps. So taking that time to rigorously assess the problem is really critical to ensure that we don't invest time in building really brilliant solutions that to resist the urge to retrofit tools into perceived gaps and ensure that we don't invest in building brilliant solutions for problems that may not necessarily exist.
I completely agree with you. Completely agree with you there. And I think that is not only applicable for pharma, it's applicable across a wide variety of industries for sure when it comes to technology. So with that, Kate, thank you so much for sharing your insights on AI and pharmaceuticals and life sciences space and technologies that actually benefit patients. So to help pharmaceutical leaders draw from such partnerships, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. To our Pharmatica community, thanks for tuning in. If you found this episode valuable, please follow, rate, and share. Join the conversation on X and LinkedIn and at EN360 Tech, where we will start posting latest insights on Pharmatica. Or visit our website for more expert insights. Thank you.